I reckon I ain't the best at telling stories, but I figured I'd share one that hits close to home. Now, it ain't exactly about me, but it's something I seen happening to a buddy of mine, Tom. Tom was always a straightforward kind of guy. Worked hard at the mill every day, coming home covered in sawdust and sweat. He had a wife, Maggie, who was something else. Maggie was the kind of woman who could light up a room just by walking in. She had this laugh that'd make you smile even on your worst days. Tom loved her more than anything. Tom and Maggie had been married for about 15 years. They had 2 kids, Jenny and Billy, both teenagers. Life was going along just fine, or so it seemed. Tom was working hard to put food on the table and keep a roof over their heads. He didn't notice the little things at first, like how Maggie'd started dressing up more when she went out, or how she was spending more time on her phone. One night, Tom came home later than usual. The mill had a big order to fill, and he was doing all he could to get it done. When he walked in the door, the house was quiet. Too quiet. He found Maggie sitting at the kitchen table, looking real nervous. "Hey, hun," he said. "What's going on?" Maggie looked up at him, and he could see the tears welling up in her eyes. "Tom," she started, "there's something I gotta tell you." Tom's heart sank. He knew something was wrong, but he didn't want to believe it. "What is it, Maggie?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've been seeing someone else," she confessed, her voice trembling. "I didn't mean for it to happen, but it did. I'm so sorry, Tom." Tom felt like he'd been punched in the gut. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. "Who?" he managed to ask, his voice raw with hurt and anger. "It's Joe," she said, barely audible. "Joe from down the street." Joe was a guy Tom had known for years. They weren't close friends, but they were friendly enough. Tom couldn't believe that Joe would do something like this. Tom didn't say nothing for a long time. He just stood there, staring at Maggie, trying to process what she was telling him. Finally, he found his voice. "Why, Maggie? Why'd you do it?" Maggie shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know, Tom. I guess I felt lonely. You were always working so hard, and I felt like I was all alone. Joe was there, and one thing led to another." Tom couldn't wrap his head around it. He loved Maggie, and he'd always tried to do right by her. But now, everything he thought he knew was falling apart. Over the next few weeks, things were tense between them. Tom tried to keep things as normal as he could for the kids, but it was hard. He couldn't stop thinking about Maggie and Joe. He felt betrayed, hurt, and angry all at once. Maggie tried to make amends, but Tom wasn't sure if he could ever trust her again. He spent a lot of nights sleeping on the couch, staring at the ceiling, wondering what he was going to do. Eventually, Tom decided he needed some time to think. He packed a bag and headed out to his brother's cabin in the woods. It was a quiet place where he could clear his head and figure out what he wanted. As he sat by the lake, watching the sunset, he thought about his life with Maggie. He thought about the good times they'd had, the love they'd shared, and the family they'd built together. He wondered if it was worth trying to save or if it was time to move on. Tom didn't have all the answers, but he knew one thing for sure. Whatever happened, he was going to be okay. He was a good man, and he deserved to be treated right. If Maggie couldn't see that, then maybe it was time for him to find someone who could. When he finally went back home, Tom and Maggie had a long talk. They decided to try marriage counseling to see if they could work things out. It wasn't going to be easy, but Tom was willing to give it a shot. He knew it was going to take time to rebuild the trust, but he was hoping that one day, things might be good again. And if not, well, Tom knew he was strong enough to face whatever came his way. He'd been through the worst of it, and he was still standing. That was something to be proud of. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months. Tom and Maggie started going to counseling every Wednesday evening. The sessions were tough. They had to dig deep into their past, their feelings, and their fears. The counselor, a kind but firm woman named Dr. Jenkins, didn't let him off easy. She made him face their problems head on. Tom found it hard to open up at first. He wasn't used to talking about his feelings. But Dr. Jenkins had a way of getting him to talk, and little by little, he started to share. He talked about how much he loved Maggie, how he felt betrayed, and how he didn't know if he could ever trust her again. Maggie, on the other hand, was more open. She talked about her loneliness, her regrets, and her desire to make things right. She admitted that what she'd done was wrong, and she was willing to do whatever it took to fix it. One evening, after a particularly tough session, Tom and Maggie went for a walk in the park. It was a crisp autumn evening, and the leaves were turning all shades of red and gold. They walked in silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Tom spoke up. "Maggie," he said, "I don't know if I can ever forget what happened, but I do know that I don't want to lose you. I still love you, even though it hurts." Maggie stopped and looked at him, her eyes filled with tears. "Tom," she said, "I'm so sorry for what I did. I love you too, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make it up to you." They stood there for a long time, holding each other, letting the tears fall. It was a start, a small step towards healing. As the months went by, things slowly started to get better. They had their good days and their bad days, but they were trying. Tom noticed that Maggie was more present, more engaged with the family. She made an effort to be there for him and the kids, to show them how much she cared. Tom also made changes. He started taking more time off work to spend with the family. He realized that he'd been so focused on providing that he'd neglected the people he was providing for. He didn't want to make that mistake again. Jenny and Billy, who'd sensed the tension between their parents, seemed to relax a bit. They didn't know all the details, but they could see that their mom and dad were working things out. One Saturday, Tom decided to take the family on a trip to the beach. It was a place they used to go when the kids were younger, and he thought it might bring back some good memories. They spent the day building sandcastles, swimming in the ocean, and eating ice cream. For the first time in a long time, Tom felt a sense of peace. As the sun was setting, they all sat on the beach, watching the waves roll in. Tom put his arm around Maggie, and she leaned her head on his shoulder. "Tom," she said softly, "thank you for giving us another chance." Tom smiled and kissed her on the forehead. "We're a family, Maggie," he said, "and families stick together, no matter what." Years passed, and Tom and Maggie continued to work on their marriage. It wasn't always easy, but they were committed to each other. They learned to communicate better, to be more open and honest. They found new ways to connect, whether it was through shared hobbies, date nights, or just spending time together. Tom never completely forgot about what happened, but he learned to forgive. He realized that holding on to the past would only keep him from moving forward. He chose to focus on the present and the future, on building a stronger, healthier relationship with Maggie. Their kids grew up and went off to college, but they always came back home for holidays and special occasions. They saw the effort their parents had put into saving their marriage, and it taught them valuable lessons about love, forgiveness, and resilience. Tom and Maggie grew old together, hand in hand. They faced life's challenges with a newfound strength, knowing that they could overcome anything as long as they had each other. Their love story was far from perfect, but it was real, and that was all that mattered. In the end, Tom looked back on his life with a sense of gratitude. He'd been through the worst pain he'd ever known, but he'd come out stronger on the other side. He'd learned that love wasn't always easy, but it was worth fighting for. And so Tom and Maggie lived out their days in a small house by the lake, surrounded by the memories they'd made and the love they'd built. They found happiness in the simple things, like sitting on the porch swing, watching the sunset, and knowing that they'd weathered the storm together. Tom often thought back to that fateful night when Maggie confessed her affair. It had been the darkest moment of his life, but it had also been a turning point. It forced him to confront their problems, to dig deep and find the strength to heal. He realized that sometimes the hardest trials in life were also the most transformative. They could break you, or they could make you stronger. And for Tom and Maggie, it made them stronger. Their story was a testament to the power of love, forgiveness, and resilience. It was a reminder that even when things seem impossible, there's always hope. And that was a lesson worth remembering. Tom continued to work at the mill, but he made sure to balance his time better. He didn't want to fall into the same trap of neglecting his family. He made it a point to be there for the important moments, to celebrate the little victories, and to support Maggie in her endeavors. Maggie, on her part, found new ways to channel her energy. She took up volunteer work at the local community center, helping out with various programs and events. It gave her a sense of purpose and fulfillment, and it also helped her reconnect with the community. Their relationship with Joe, however, was never the same. Tom couldn't bring himself to forgive Joe, and they kept their distance. Joe eventually moved away, leaving the neighborhood and the memories of the affair behind. As the years went by, Tom and Maggie faced other challenges. They dealt with health issues, financial struggles, and the ups and downs of life. But through it all, they stood by each other, their bond growing stronger with each passing year. Tom's love for Maggie never wavered, and neither did hers for him. They learned that true love wasn't about perfection, it was about acceptance, forgiveness, and the willingness to fight for each other. Their kids, Jenny and Billy, grew up to be kind, compassionate, and resilient adults. They carried the lessons they'd learned from their parents into their own lives, building strong relationships and facing challenges with courage and grace. Tom and Maggie eventually became grandparents, welcoming a new generation into their family. They cherished the moments they spent with their grandchildren, passing down the stories and wisdom they'd gained over the years. In the twilight of their lives, Tom and Maggie often sat together on their porch, reflecting on their journey. They knew that they weren't perfect, but they were proud of the life they'd built together. They'd faced their darkest fears, but they'd come out on the other side, stronger and more in love than ever. Tom passed away peacefully one summer evening, with Maggie by his side. He left this world knowing that he'd lived a full and meaningful life, surrounded by the love of his family. Maggie, though heartbroken, found comfort in the memories they'd shared and the legacy they'd created. She continued to live in their little house by the lake, surrounded by the echoes of their love story. And every evening, as the sun set over the water, she felt Tom's presence with her, a reminder that true love never dies. Their story became a beacon of hope for others in their community, a testament to the power of love and forgiveness. It showed that even in the face of betrayal and heartache, it's possible to heal, to rebuild, and to find happiness again. Tom and Maggie's love story was far from perfect, but it was real, and that was all that mattered. They'd face the storm together, and they'd come out stronger on the other side. And in the end, that was what made their story truly beautiful.